You. The voice cut through the courtroom like a sudden clap of thunder. Sharp, clear, unmistakable. Everyone froze. Lawyers stopped flipping through files. The clerk paused mid-keystroke. A pen rolled off a desk and hit the floor, but no one reached for it. Even the judge, who had been casually reading through her notes, slowly looked up from the bench with wide, startled eyes. There she stood, a little black girl, standing barely 4 feet tall, wearing a sky-blue dress with bright sunflower buttons down the front. Her hair was styled into 2 neat puffs, tied with yellow ribbons that matched the buttons. She couldn't have been older than 7, but in that moment, her voice carried more weight than anyone else's in the room. Her small hand was raised. A finger pointed directly at the man sitting on the witness stand, a white police officer in full uniform, his chest puffed with confidence, one hand resting on his belt. The officer furrowed his brows, clearly caught off guard. He looked around, as if expecting someone else to stand up behind him. Me, he said, blinking. The girl didn't move. She just nodded, slow and steady. Yes, she said, her voice soft but firm. You're the one. A ripple moved through the courtroom. Gasps, shifting in seats. One man in the back coughed awkwardly, then went quiet. Her mother, Miss Evelyn Carter, who had been sitting next to her just seconds before, reached for her daughter's hand. But the little girl was already walking forward, past the wooden divider and into the middle of the room. No one stopped her. Not the bailiff. Not the judge. Not even her mother. It was like time had paused to let this child speak. She stood there, facing the man who had just sworn under oath that the traffic stop he made 3 weeks earlier had been routine. That he and his partner had followed proper procedures. That nothing about the stop was unusual or aggressive. But this little girl, this tiny witness who no one had planned to hear from, was now standing face to face with that claim. And her silence was louder than his testimony. She tilted her head slightly. Her lips trembled, just a little, but her eyes didn't leave his. You told my mommy to shut up, she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. You made her cry. You made me hold my hands up like I did something bad. The courtroom fell into stunned silence again. The judge leaned back, hands folded. No interruption came. The officer didn't respond. He stared at the girl like he'd seen a ghost. His confident posture was now slumping, and a flicker of something, shame, maybe, crossed his face. The girl continued. You said we were suspicious, but we were just driving home. Mommy wasn't speeding. The light wasn't broken. She just picked me up from Nana's house. Her mother had tears in her eyes now, trying not to sob. I prayed in the back seat, the girl said, looking around now, her eyes searching every adult in the room. I prayed nothing bad would happen to Mommy. I thought you were going to take her away. Then she turned back to the officer. You scared me, she said, and you didn't say sorry. It was quiet enough to hear the buzzing of the overhead lights. The judge finally spoke, voice slow, measured. Young lady, what's your name? Imani, she replied. Imani, the judge repeated, as if trying to process everything that had just unfolded. And for a long moment, no one said another word. Because in that courtroom filled with grown adults, legal experts, and officers of the law, it was the voice of a child, clear, brave, and honest, that changed everything. The case had started like many others do, quietly. No news coverage, no cameras, just another courtroom, another complaint against the police. Miss Evelyn Carter, a hardworking single mother, had filed the report 3 weeks earlier. Her claim was simple but serious, that she and her young daughter had been pulled over one night and mistreated during a traffic stop. The reason for the stop? A broken taillight. Except, when the car was checked the next morning, both taillights were working perfectly. Evelyn said she knew from the beginning something felt wrong. She had been driving home from her mother's house in a nearby suburb, her daughter Imani strapped in the back seat, half asleep, still clutching her teddy bear. Then came the flashing red and blue lights in the mirror. She pulled over calmly, rolled down her window, and asked what the problem was. But instead of an explanation, she was met with flashlights in her face, voices barking questions, and an officer pulling at her door handle before she could even respond. Step out of the car. Keep your hand where I can see them. Don't move unless we tell you to. It all happened so fast. Evelyn's hands trembled. Her daughter began to cry. She tried to explain, tried to ask what she had done wrong, but the more she spoke, the angrier they became. According to her complaint, one of the officers raised his voice and told her to shut her mouth. She said the other leaned into the back window, scaring Imani so badly that she dropped her teddy bear and covered her face. The officers claimed none of this ever happened. In court, they sat tall, uniforms pressed, expressions flat and professional. They denied everything. No aggression, no yelling, no search. "We followed standard procedure," said one officer confidently while testifying. "It was a routine stop, and the driver was treated with respect. There was no threat. We remained polite and professional the entire time." The courtroom was quiet as he spoke. A few people nodded along, as if ready to move on. The judge made notes. The defense attorney crossed his arms, appearing satisfied. But just as the officer finished his sentence, something unexpected happened. A small voice rang out. "You!" Everyone turned. From a front row of the gallery, a little girl had risen to her feet. It was Imani. Her blue dress looked a little too big for her frame, and her hair was neatly done in two puffs. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were focused, locked on the man at the witness stand. Her tiny finger pointed straight at him. "You're the one," she said. Gasps swept through the room. The officer froze, caught mid-motion as he reached for his glass of water. The judge looked up quickly. Even the clerk stopped typing. Imani's mother reached out to sit her back down, but the girl gently stepped forward, eyes still locked on the man who had denied everything. For a moment, it felt like time stopped. Everyone had heard the officer say it was routine. Everyone had heard him say polite and professional. But now, a child who wasn't supposed to testify had just stood up and shattered the silence with a truth too powerful to ignore. And in that moment, it was no longer just a case about broken taillights or legal procedures. It became something much deeper. It became a story about a mother, a child, and a reality behind one night that couldn't be erased with rehearsed answers. A truth was standing there, just 4 feet tall, pointing, and no one could look away. The judge leaned forward, her eyes narrowing slightly as she addressed the small figure standing in the center of the room. "Young lady," she said gently, "do you know this man?" The entire courtroom turned toward the little girl, now holding tightly onto a small teddy bear that was clearly worn with love. Her blue dress swayed slightly as she stepped forward. Her black shoes made the softest taps against the polished courtroom floor, but her presence was anything but small. She nodded slowly. Her voice, though soft, reached every corner of the room. "He's the one who made Mommy cry." There was a sharp intake of breath from several people seated in the gallery. Some shifted in their seats. Others sat frozen. Even the judge paused, surprised by the clarity and weight of that simple statement. The officer on the witness stand, who moments earlier had answered questions with the calm, mechanical confidence of someone used to being believed, blinked rapidly. His face, until now unreadable, cracked just a little. A twitch in the jaw, a blink that lasted too long. The judge glanced toward the bailiff and gave a small nod. With unusual gentleness, the bailiff walked over and extended a hand to the girl. "Would you like to sit here and tell us what happened?" the judge asked, motioning to the witness seat. Imani looked up at her mother, who gave a subtle nod, eyes filled with silent encouragement. Then, with her teddy bear still clutched in one arm, the little girl climbed onto the chair. She didn't fidget. She didn't ramble. What followed was not the confused rambling of a child, but a clear, heartbreaking recollection, spoken in the honest way only a child can speak. "We were driving home," she began, looking straight ahead. "Mommy picked me up from Nana's house. I was sleepy, so I had my bear in my blanket." She took a breath, eyes growing more serious. Then the blue lights came behind us. Mommy got scared. She told me to stay calm and not say anything. She looked over at the officer again, but he yelled at her. He told her to shut up and get out of the car. He told her she was being difficult. She wasn't. She was just scared. There were murmurs around the room. Someone in the back wiped away a tear. Imani's voice dropped a little, but remained steady. He made her put her hands on the car. Then he looked at me through the window and told me to put my hands up. I was so scared. I thought maybe I had done something wrong. She hugged her teddy bear a little tighter. I didn't know why he was mad. Mommy wasn't yelling. She was crying. She paused again. Her tiny feet swung slightly above the ground. Then, he touched his belt, she said. The thing that holds his gun. Like he was going to pull it out. I didn't move. I just held my hands in the air. By now, the officer was looking down, his eyes no longer meeting hers. The judge leaned back slowly, absorbing every word. I thought they were going to take Mommy away, Imani said. So I closed my eyes and I prayed. I asked God to make them stop yelling. I asked God to keep Mommy safe. Silence filled the room. Not the heavy silence of boredom or routine, but the thick, stunned quiet of people realizing they had just heard something they would never forget. This wasn't a legal argument. It wasn't a cross-examination. It was a child telling the truth. A truth that had never been written in a police report. A truth that wasn't caught on camera. A truth that had been carried in a little girl's heart every night since that awful evening. She wasn't supposed to testify. But now, no one could unhear her words. And nothing in that courtroom felt routine anymore. Everyone in that courtroom was waiting for the same thing. They expected the officer to roll his eyes, to claim the little girl was confused, to say she misremembered details like so many children do. Some even expected him to get defensive, to raise his voice and double down on the official version of events. But instead, what followed was silence. A long, uncomfortable silence. The officer on the witness stand looked down at his lap. He didn't blink. His hands fidgeted slightly. His badge, once gleaming proudly under the courtroom lights, now looked heavier, almost burdensome. He took a breath, then another, and then, with a voice so quiet it nearly got lost in the tension of the room, he said words no one had prepared for. She's right. At first, people weren't sure they'd heard him correctly. But then came the gasps, the audible shift in the room. Murmurs spread like wildfire across the gallery. The judge leaned forward, eyebrows raised. Even the court reporter paused typing, eyes widening. The officer cleared his throat, his voice strained. I lost my temper that night, he said. Her mother didn't do anything wrong. His words landed like thunder in the stillness. I got frustrated because of the neighborhood. We label it high risk. I was already on edge. I assumed things I had no right to assume. He swallowed hard. I treated them like they were guilty. I treated that woman like she was dangerous just because she looked like she didn't belong there. Because of the car she drove. Because she didn't smile. Now even the defense attorney, the man whose job was to defend that officer's actions, had gone still. His pen hovered above his notepad, but didn't move. The officer turned slightly, eyes searching the courtroom until they landed back on the little girl. His voice softened. But seeing that child here today, hearing her say she prayed during a traffic stop, that did something to me. His voice cracked. He blinked rapidly, trying to hold back the emotion rising in his throat. I didn't think about what that night did to her. I didn't think about what it would be like to be 7 years old and be told to raise your hands like a criminal. I didn't think about how it felt for a mother to be told to shut up in front of her child. A woman in the back row wiped a tear from her cheek. Someone else shook their head slowly in disbelief. I failed that night, he continued, eyes wet now. Not just as a police officer, but as a human being. You could hear a pin drop. The judge, still stunned, rested her hand over her mouth for a moment before lowering it slowly. Her eyes remained locked on the officer, as if trying to determine whether what she was witnessing was truly real. Even the bailiff, stone-faced and rigid all morning, looked shaken. The little girl, still seated beside her mother, said nothing. She simply held her teddy bear a little closer, watching the man who once scared her finally speak with honesty. This wasn't the ending anyone expected. No rehearsed defense. No legal loopholes. Just truth. Hard. Raw. Uncomfortable. And yet, healing. Because in that courtroom, for the first time, someone who had the power to harm chose instead to admit he was wrong. And everyone who witnessed it, judge, jury, lawyers, even strangers in the gallery, would never forget the moment a man in uniform was humbled not by law, but by the voice of a little girl. The judge ordered a recess. No one moved at first. It was as if the room needed time to breathe. Lawyers leaned back in their chairs, blinking. Spectators, turned to one another in stunned silence. Even the clerk, usually glued to her keyboard, just sat still, hands in her lap. What had just happened wasn't ordinary. A decorated police officer had admitted wrongdoing, not in secret, not behind closed doors, but in open court. And he hadn't been forced into it. No lawyer pressured him. No camera demanded a show. It was the honest testimony of a little girl that broke through. Her words, her eyes, her small voice had done what countless adults had failed to do. Make someone see the truth. As people filed out into the hallway, the buzz began. Low whispers, shaken voices. Some talked about the officer's unexpected confession. Others couldn't stop thinking about the girl, Imani. How someone so young had spoken so clearly, so bravely. The officer himself was no longer in the courtroom. He sat alone on a wooden bench outside, just beneath the framed portraits of retired judges. His once straight shoulders were slouched. His badge glinted under the hallway lights, but he didn't seem to notice. His hands were folded tightly, fingers interlaced. His eyes weren't focused on anything. He looked like a man sitting with the weight of what he'd done, not just that night on the road, but in all the nights before when he hadn't stopped to question his own actions. Then came the sound of small footsteps. Soft, deliberate. He looked up. There, just a few steps away, was the little girl again, Imani. Her mother stood behind her, but said nothing. This wasn't her moment. It was her daughter's. Imani held something in her hand, folded neatly and slightly wrinkled from her pocket. Without a word, she stepped forward and handed it to the officer. He hesitated for a second before slowly taking it from her tiny fingers. He opened it. It was a drawing, done in crayons. Childlike, uneven, but full of heart. On one side was Imani, smiling. Next to her was her mother, wearing a long yellow dress. And next to them was a man in a police uniform, also smiling. His arms were open wide like he was there to protect them, not hurt them. "I made this," she said, her voice quiet but strong. "It's what I wish happened that night." The officer stared at the paper for a long time. His throat tightened. He swallowed hard, but the lump remained. His lips trembled slightly as he looked back at her. "I'm sorry," he said, voice cracking. "I really am." And then, for the first time all day, he smiled. Just a little. Not because everything was fixed. Not because all was forgiven. But because somehow in that small act of kindness, he had been given a second chance to be better. There was no crowd clapping. No dramatic music playing. Just a quiet moment between a man who had failed and a child who chose to show grace. And that's how it ended. Not with shouting. Not with blame. Not with courtroom drama. But with truth. With courage from a child who didn't let fear silence her. With a moment of unexpected humanity from a man who had once let fear and power control him. Everyone who witnessed it, those in the gallery, the judge, the court staff, left that courthouse changed. Some cried. Some just walked in silence. But all of them remembered. Because in a world where so many speak just to be heard, it was the quiet truth of a little girl that spoke the loudest.